for the pledge of the flag. I pledge allegiance. Okay, we'll begin this evening with our open forum. Is there anyone that would like to come forward and speak to the board at this time? Okay, we'll move on to celebrating our successes. Kathy, you want to come forward? And Mark? Oh, okay. Mark, you're the one.
Good afternoon or early evening. I have the distinguished privilege of providing you information about students that took our AP exams in early May that have qualified as a scholar with honors or distinction, which means the minimum is they took at least 3 AP tests and scored at least a 3 or higher. And so we have a few people here tonight. There were a total of about 10 students that qualified in our high school. So we'll probably have them come, Chair, if you'd like to meet each of them at your end, would that be the best? So here tonight, Jake Johnsrud, AP Scholar. Jake took at least 3 AP tests or more and scored a 3 or higher. Yep. Yep. And we have Jen. And since I have the mic and I have just a little freedom here, just want to give you an update. We had our 8th graders join us at the high school today, another outstanding day. We had 65 juniors and seniors that were link crew leaders. I think it sets a great tone for the school year, and so the students got to work with link crew, which helps them learn what the school's about, and then they got to walk their schedule, got to do lunch, all that kind of stuff. So I think the tension of coming to the high school from the junior high is much, or the middle school is much less intense for the first day of school with all 1,300 students. So thank you for that again.
There we go. For tonight's agenda, is there any action that the board would like to have to approve it?
I'll move approval.
Okay, is there a second to that? Second. Okay. Motion's been made and seconded. Those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next, we have the consent items. Is there any action the board would like to take here? Okay, we have a motion and second. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to reports. Dr. Funk.
Short report tonight. Next slide, please. Current enrollment actually is a little more than that. That's what this was as of this morning. It was 3372. That's just grades K through 12. That does not take into account our ALC students or any of our early childhood programming. This is the highest student enrollment we've started with in the past decade. We actually had 8 more students enroll since this slide was put together. And adding those 8, since July 1st, we've had 137 students enroll in the district. I looked back last summer, we had 67 enroll. So we have almost doubled as far as what's happening. So yeah, I think if we're looking for a positive sign of growth in our community, the school district is certainly one of those positive things that is going on. And as you just heard from Mark, and Corey, you can probably, during the teacher report, if you want, can talk about what you saw at Southwest. I visited a number of the buildings today. I think I got everywhere except with the exception of Halverson, which I plan on visiting in the morning. And by all accounts, the kindergarten, from talking to the principals, they said there's going to be a lot less tears tomorrow when parents drop off their kindergarten students because they had a chance to spend some time with them today and get comfortable with the building. Grade 8, we had the Link Crew students, and I saw a lot of positives at Southwest with the 6th grade students with the orientation today there as well. So it was a real positive start to the school year, and really focusing in on a welcoming environment for our students in the new buildings. Thank you.
As a parent, the Southwest Day for 6th graders was awesome, and the open house was very well put together, and that's from someone who was very anxious myself. So thank you, everyone who did that, and I think that's probably the way to go in the future from personal experience. And then I actually went to this NAMI event. This is a grassroots organizing event talking about legislation and stuff, but I didn't know a lot about NAMI. So it was really interesting. National Alliance on Mental Illness. I mean, I know that they did mental health stuff. I didn't even know what it stood for, so I learned a lot. But what I'd like to share is they shared, like, the regional service gaps. So for our region, Region 10, for children, so it's kind of how it would impact, like, the students and things like that. The services that there's gaps are psychiatric prescribers, so like psychiatrists, nurse practitioners, and clinical nurse specialists, and then specific placement for children with aggressive behaviors, and then inpatient in like the psychiatry beds. So that was kind of interesting. I learned like a heck of a lot more. That's kind of what's applicable here, but so I'm really glad I went. And then also I wanted to just congratulate and thank everyone who like kind of stepped up and wants to serve on the school board and filed for candidacy, including you two and Dave. He's not on there. So it's just exciting that people want to serve and be a part of the board and the school district. So just exciting.
I attended the policy committee meeting along with Angie, and we'll be talking about some of those policies, I think, later in today's agenda. I attended the Family Services Collaborative meeting, and there was a representative there from Public Health talking about bringing in a lice expert to actually work with some of our families in the district. They also wanted to potentially have some education with different staff members among different school districts in the area, but it was hard for them to coordinate that with different start and stop times of school calendars. But maybe that might be something for the future. Also talked about vaping and educating staff and the community more about vaping. And there is a parent rep needed for the Family Services Collaborative, so they're in need of a parent rep. And then I attended the alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs meeting. The vaping discussion continued there. We talked about some upcoming events. I attended, along with some others, the back-to-school staff meeting, the first day that staff was back. And then I stayed for the ALICE training, which I thought was very helpful, even just for me to go through that. And I think it's important, too, that our subs maybe are filled in on that as well. And then I attended the sub-teachers meeting the other day as well. Thank you.
I also went to the opening hug-in, and I think there was a lot of excitement with our staff there. A lot of people ready to get back at it, and Kristen Seeger did a fantastic job in her speech, and so it was a very nice way to start the school year. Moving on to our teacher report, Corey.
Okay, I would also reiterate the fact that Southwest orientation for sixth graders today went very well. From a teacher perspective, you could see that the stress level was pretty high at the beginning of the day, and as the course of the day kind of unfolded, a lot of that stress just kind of disappeared. I think there was a lot bigger comfort level for the sixth graders, and they didn't have to contend with the seventh graders messing it up for them, so that was good. I would also like to just say that despite the weather conditions this summer, Wind Down Wednesday tent for ALEA and AL schools, lots of books and bookmarks were given out, and a lot of interest around that tent all summer long. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to Safe and Healthy Schools, Activity Code Update, Afton and Mark.
All right. So we are back just to go over where we're sitting with our chemical violation code. The last time that we were here, we were able to talk through some of the areas that we needed to focus on a little bit more. I believe that the three areas that we really left here thinking that we needed to take some more careful consideration was, what does the education part look like? What do we want to get out of, not only do we see that our students are unfortunately making some negative choices, but how are we educating that? The next thing is, how are we involving our coaches? How are we making this a group effort, that it's not only our students and our parents that are having to deal with this situation and myself, but it's our coaches, because our coaches are spending a lot of time. Many of our coaches are teachers in the building. So how are we collaborating all together to make sure that this is going to be a positive effort going forward? And then I would say, too, just all of the requirements. We don't want to be scaring people away. We want to make sure that we are still keeping these kiddos involved in our athletics and our activities, because we know that the lifelong experiences and lessons that they're learning from being a part of this are obviously our most important concern. So I know that you have seen this. I believe that you have seen this ahead of time. We're able to look over it. A few things that I just want to make sure that we're addressing and covering a little bit are, again, going back to the education piece. We sat down, we spoke with our coaches, we spoke as staff. What does this look like? What is going to be the best for the education piece? In talking with some of our Freeborn County Court Services officers, we decided that being able to schedule a 1-hour, one-on-one, whether that's parents involved, just the student, really that can be up in the air. Obviously, we would stress having those parents involved. But this could happen in the school day, because these individuals from Freeborn County Court Services will be in our school system. They're going to be in the building. It's going to be a lot easier for us to set this up. It is not separate transportation that they're going to have to travel to. So this is going to make this easy, but yet going to be able to provide them with the education that they need. So there would be a scheduled 1-hour chemical education meeting with those individuals from Court Services at the high school. We do want to make sure that this is going to be scheduled fairly immediately. Scheduled within 2 weeks, that does not mean that it has to happen within 2 weeks, but we want to make sure that we're addressing those things as soon as they happen. Along with that, though, does come the reentry. So we really, again, are focusing back on how are coaches involved in this process. And that reentry meeting is going to be with those parents, the athlete, and the coaches and myself. We look into the excused, unexcused absences, both in the school setting, in the sport, really focusing on that we need them to be committed. And so again, we're just looking at what do those excuses from practices from school look like, holding them accountable for being there. And then the last one is the 8 hours of community service. And we did drop this number from the original one. We did not want this to be overwhelming, but we do know how critical community service hours can be. It can be very meaningful and impactful to our students. Another thing that I want to focus on this too is that these hours are not going to be additional hours if these students are cited through our court systems. They will have community service hours. They will have requirements that they have to do through the court system. And so these will not be additional. We will include these. But we do know that not all of our violations come from the court system. They are not cited. They do come from pictures, from things that happen in the school. So we know that not all of those students will have to do this through the court system. So we do want to add these 8 hours of community service to those situations that they're not having to serve those. So again, we are going with the first violation penalty is going to be lining up with the Minnesota State High School League for as far as what they miss in their season. So it is going to be 2 weeks or 2 events, whichever is longer. And that will start immediately. As soon as the violation occurs and they are notified by myself, that will start those 2 weeks. And again, they have to serve at least those 2 weeks or 2 events, whichever is longer. For that second violation, we are looking at going to 50% of the scheduled contests on the calendar of the sport that they are playing. Again, this is going to be, this was where our first violation was prior to looking at this code, but now this is going to be the second violation. So this is the second time that something occurs. Again, whether it is a citation that they receive or something that is brought to our attention. And then the third penalty will unfortunately be the student will lose eligibility. But at that point, we really feel that there's something that needs to be addressed. And that is going to require our students becoming educated on an issue that they are dealing with. And so we are requiring that they have to voluntarily enter and complete a chemical dependency program or treatment program, and then they can come back to participation. But we are going to make that a minimum period of 6 months out of an activity so that we know that they're getting that treatment and the help that they need to move in the right direction as a student athlete.
Any questions or comments?
This was not in our packet. Are we able to get a copy of that?
Yeah, there was must have been a disconnect there. It was sent on Friday, but yeah, we can send it to you for sure.
Thank you. And then, so the first violation, Afton, you said lines up with the other around. How about the second and the third? How do they compare to?
Yep. So the second and third, they do not directly line up with the Minnesota State High School League. You know, it does depend on the sport that they're playing. The State High School League doesn't go by percentages. They do go by the events participated in. So there may be some sports that have a shorter competitive season that actually what the State High School League is going to require for a second penalty because I believe that is, and I'm sorry, I don't have that paperwork right in front of me, is that it is 4 weeks, or 4 events, whichever is longer. Again, I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me. But in most cases, that what we have here is going to be a little bit longer. But if we look at football, if we look at dance team, some of those shorter season sports, that actually is lining up with that. Football, they have 8 games in a season. If they miss 4 games, that is 50% of their season. So that is how the State High School League is going to rule that one. And for the third violation, the State High School League, they also are going to a situation where they're going to enter something that is going to get them the chemical dependency help. However, their minimum return is going to be a lot less than what this is right now.
So ours is 6 months to guarantee completion.
Right.
To me, that doesn't really, you know, I know we want them to complete, but if they are able to complete earlier, then it seems to be just adding a period of penalty to it. Do you see it any other way?
Yeah, I mean, it would really depend on what programs we have available. And, you know, unfortunately, I don't know how much we have available here in town and what those programs, the length that they look like, what they are going to enter. They could all vary. So I think it's just going to be per that individual and what chemical dependency program they end up entering into. But yes, you know, there will be a time there, probably from completion until they would get back to an activity, whether that be in the middle of a season, at the start of a season. Really, that's going to be up in the air on when these occur.
Right, and it probably wouldn't necessarily be an inpatient treatment. It could be an outpatient treatment. So if they even went to Rochester next month and completed within 2 or 3 months, what would be the reason to have them stay out an additional 3 months?
Isn't part of the time, it's a punishment, isn't it? It's not a, I mean, I see that you say you want them to complete, but I've always considered it a punishment. And so it's like a jail sentence. So why would we commute their sentence? And didn't that used to be a year?
It did used to be a year.
Yeah.
And that was my question. Was
Yep.
it punitive or not? Because it wasn't presented in a punitive way. So it is a punitive 6-month period in addition to completing. And what does the Minnesota State High School League have for that one?
I'm sorry, I don't know the exact. I can definitely get that information though when they get you this information that's on here.
It looks like you guys spent a lot of time on this.
We
I
did.
know.
We did.
Last time you came to talk about it, looked like you spent a lot of time on it then. So thank you for, you know, taking the time, looking at this. It makes sense to me.
And I'll just voice the same concerns I did last time. These are all young adults that have signed with their parents a attestation that they're not going to violate. And then this just seems like a road to mediocrity to me. These people become adults and they want the same treatment when they get hired for jobs. And so, to me, the sporting is a privilege. It's not a right that any of them have. It's a privilege. And there's rules that surround that. And I think when we start to water these things down, we're asking for difficulty. So I'll continue to voice that, and if the board votes otherwise, then I'll support it. But that's my opinion.
Okay. So what's the next step?
Well, this is a high school handbook type issue, so the board does not necessarily weigh in and vote on an issue such as this. So this is what Afton and her coaches and Mark have come together as the proposal moving forward. And really, we're here to speak with the board, to hear concerns from the community about the proposal that we have in front of us here.
I did talk to Neil for a while on this topic, and he feels that we were too hard at the beginning. And I guess for me, I kind of go back and forth because I was on the board last time when we made it actually tougher. But I guess where I would be at today is I would go with this because it softens the first blow, so it doesn't make it so punitive, so you can get them back. And because hopefully that sport is so very, very important to them and they enjoy it and it keeps them active. However, the second, third time, I think we need to be a little tougher. It's just my opinion, so.
And that's what I appreciate about it as well, is, okay, kids make mistakes, all right, there's a penalty, there's a consequence to it, but the second and third, okay, increase the level of severity significantly.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'll just chime in here since I'm sitting here. Afton, with the coaches, have done a great job of looking for leadership opportunities so that before we get to these violations, we're working with kids ahead of time to take those leadership roles, to make you know, a situation where they can talk to a friend and stuff. And so Afton, the coaches have really, really stepped up to look at how can we provide these students with as much information possible in a positive atmosphere. I know must have been about a month ago, I mean, not that long, the coaches had the students and they're trying to figure out the title of their group, but they brought in there must have been 30, 40 kids in the media center talking about being a leader as an athlete and what that represents and what does that look like and that type of stuff. So under Afton's leadership, these coaches have really come together more than I've ever seen since I've been here. So thanks to Afton and all the coaches for putting in this extra time to provide our students with opportunities for growth.
Great, thank you very much. Moving on to effective and efficient operations, we have some policies to review. Jim Querum.
Good afternoon. 3 policies before the board tonight. I would say that the policy committee met on the 26th of July. Angie, Jill, Ashley, Kathy, and myself, and we looked at these 3 policies. The first one that's up here is the staff notification of violent behavior by students. This is one that came before the board last month, but based upon some input that we got and looking at what other school districts have done, there was a couple of minor changes, and we, as a group, as a policy committee, wanted to bring that forward to the board. So I would call your attention to the second page under the definitions. C2, in here, it doesn't specify for how long you would make the notification to staff or to their parents of the student that had an incident. And what we found and what we're recommending is to change it so there's some specificity there that basically says that if a student has an incident in the last 2 school years. The feeling was is if a student had an incident in 4th grade and none since, and they're now a junior, and we're still notifying parents that we're notifying teachers that they had a violent incident, that seemed a bit much. And so when I reviewed other school districts' policies, many of those use the last 2 school years as the timeline in which they use. So our recommendation is to change C2, replace will be reported, and replace it with what you see there from the previous 2 school years.
Okay. Is there action the board would like to take?
I'll move approval.
Is there a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor of policy 529 on violent behavior as presented signify by saying aye. Aye. Pose same sign. Motion carries.
And can I just ask, Jim, you said Roman numeral 6, the parental notice, that would be in addition to the handbook this year, correct?
Say that again, please.
The parental notice, Roman numeral 6 on that one, that was going to be added to the handbook
Yes.
this year.
That's correct. Yep. And Kathy's done a great job of putting a process in place, working with the administrators on how teachers will be notified, and that's all that will all be in place now. So, all right. The second policy is policy 413. It's the harassment and violence policy. There are 2 changes within this policy. One of them is the same one over and over again. It is recommended by MSBA model policy that we add including gender identity or expression in that list of classes there that we take a look at in relation to harassment and violence. So multiple times in the document, every time that list comes up, it's added in there, and that goes all the way through the policy. The only other change in regards to this is if we go to the last page, Ashley, you will see there is the Peggy statute where she proposed having that Child Sexual Abuse Prevention Education Act, which was approved by the legislature. So there is a statement there on Roman numeral 10, subdivision E, which adds and/or sexual abuse prevention. Those are the two changes in this policy. Everything else remains the same, and of course, we're reviewing it annually to make sure we're in compliance with it. That's F there at the bottom.
Okay, thank you. Any action? Okay, is there a second to that? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving policy changes to 413 on harassment and violence signify by saying aye. 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 Pose same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to 506.
All right, and the final policy before the board is the student discipline policy. This one was long overdue in making changes, and anytime that you look at the back of a policy and you see the number of references that have been updated, you know there's going to be significant changes within the policy. I think as far as intent of the policy itself, there isn't any significant changes, but I will point out some that we looked at that would be in addition to or a change from the MSBA model policy. So most of the red line, all of the red line changes in here would be the MSBA recommended changes, and then there are some that we looked at specifically and we talked about within the policy committee that I will point out. So we'll start on page 3, under areas of responsibility. The changes from MSBA originally said or designee shall, that we struck, and then we talked to the administrators, and one example would be sometimes a assistant principal will make a decision in regards to discipline, not just the principal. So then that's what we brought forward to the policy committee, that we would like to leave that in there, and we agreed that that should come forward as designee. So that would be one of the 4, I wouldn't call it significant changes, but changes within here. So that's one. And then, Ashley, if you could go to that sort of laundry list. I have it as page 63, but I know it's not that out of your packet down there. One of them that they have in there as far as related to discipline was the possession of nuisance devices, is how MSBA put it, or objects which cause distraction and may facilitate cheating, including but not limited to pagers, etc. Sorry, my alarm went off for some reason. And we felt every building, whether it's elementary, Southwest, or high school, they have in their handbook related to those things. And to have a laundry list here, especially like at high school where teachers have the ability to allow students to use their phones in a classroom, we just felt it was better if we just removed that entirely and left that up to the building handbooks. So that would be one change. The second change that we would propose here, besides the MSBA model. A third one, if we'd continue, is some feedback that we got from the administrative team as well and brought to the policy committee. You find that one? No, keep going. Is that it? Yep, that's it. So in the policy from MSBA, it originally said that anything that might be confiscated from a student will be released to the parent following completion of an investigation or disciplinary action. Being a former administrator and talking to the principals, there are times that you don't release it, depending upon what it is. Sometimes it's an illegal thing, for instance, and may be turned over because there's a law enforcement investigation. And so the proposed change there would be may, at the discretion of the administrator, be released to the parent. So that would be the third change that we would recommend other than the MSBA recommended. And the fourth change would be under suspension procedures. There is some very what we thought was confusing language when we talked at the policy committee, and then afterwards talking with Tammy, the special ed director, about students with disabilities. And we looked at this and then said, well, it has a whole section on the next page about suspensions for a child with disability. And so this seemed to be a very confusing sentence, and felt that the best thing we could do after we discussed after the policy committee is maybe just remove this altogether, because we have a whole section that relates to suspensions for students with a disability. So that would be the fourth one that we would recommend. All the rest, I would submit our MSBA model language, updating what we had in a policy that hadn't been looked at in quite some time. So,
Okay, thank you.
anything from others on the policy committee? Did I?
A few things come to mind. If we look back at Roman numeral 3C. We talked about that designee being a licensed administrator. Is that going to go into the policy that it will be a designee that has an administrative license?
A licensed administrator would be, I'd have to reread that, but a licensed administrator, you'd have to be a licensed administrator in order to do any kind of suspension or anything. My understanding was we were going to put designee, knowing that a licensed administrator was necessary.
Okay. Thank you. And then in Roman numeral 8, about in-school suspension, I had been curious about numbers as far as in-school suspension. So do you know if we have any numbers yet as far as in-school suspension in prior years?
I don't have numbers with me.
I have some numbers, but what I think the best thing to do would be to do a presentation for you at a future meeting. But just a comment on that. It's really interesting how the government really collects information in the manner in which they do. So for example, when we are talking about testing data, they want it disaggregated between all these different subgroups. They look at, Asian Pacifics, Islanders, Hispanics, blacks, whites, free and reduced lunch status, and so they're breaking down all these different subgroups for how we perform academically. The most interesting part about all of this, when we are looking at discipline data, they take the free and reduced piece out of it, and they don't even ask about it. So just one example tonight, I think, is just fascinating. And these are out-of-school suspensions, but we'll do one within school. So we have one subgroup in the school district that has 38% of our out-of-school suspensions, okay? Of that subgroup of 38% of the students with out-of-school suspensions, 36% of the 38 are in free and reduced lunch status. 2% are kids who do not have free and reduced lunch. So poverty is a pretty significant factor in the discipline rates of our students, and yet they don't even ask for that information. They're worried about other factors. So we'll do a whole presentation for you in the next month or so here, Jill.
Thank you.
Yep.
And then lastly, just more of a minor point, Roman numeral 9 must be 4, or 3 or 4. Each suspension action may include a readmission plan. We had talked about that being should or shall rather than may. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I know we had the discussion on that, and one of the things I brought up is oftentimes you do a readmission plan more or less with a parent right when the suspension happens. So
I think there's two different things here. Okay, there's the meeting, and then two, there's the plan. So, and sometimes the meeting cannot take place for whatever reason. But correct me if I'm wrong, Jill, but you are asking that each suspension action shall include a readmission plan regardless of when the meeting takes place. Is that accurate?
That's what we talked about, either should or shall. We had talked about those two words.
Okay.
Since one always should happen.
Yep.
I think the thought behind that was, we don't want it to be like something that's like grandiose and like, you know what I mean, like an official. It doesn't always have to maybe be like this official big plan, but something, right? Just to help the child be more successful upon reentry. But we didn't want it to be like something that's just a big thing always. And sometimes you're gonna have to have that big thing for repeat offenders or someone who has like significant needs, but sometimes it can be probably pretty small, but just have some kind of plan that the parents, the student, staff know about, whether how small it is.
So then, was there anything else, Joe, other than that? Okay.
No, I just had one comment, it's a positive one. I know we had like a lengthy discussion on that whole nuisance devices, and I just, in our discussion, making sure it aligns with what's actually happening, because we all know that students have cell phones in schools and stuff. So I think that was probably just the best way to handle it, is just nix it and get rid of it completely and handle it teacher by teacher, school by school, and in the handbooks.
Okay.
That does remind me of some of our vaping conversation over the past week, and just how I'm told that that the Juuls, or whatever the vaping device is, can be used even right in class or even recharged in a Chromebook. So I wonder if will that type of nuisance device be addressed in a different way without having it here, or do we need to include it for that reason? Okay, so even having it and doing that will be covered. Thank you.
So then what we have is the recommendation to approve with the MSBA recommended changes, the local changes, and replacing must with should, with may. Oh, yeah. You got that right, Ashley? Yeah, okay. As long as she's got it. Okay.
Okay. Is there any action the board would like to take on this policy? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the updated changes to policy 506 and student disciplines signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay, is there a second? Okay, motion's been made and second. Meeting's adjourned.